Hi everyone, my name's Hannah. I'm from Deloitte and I'm here to talk to you about Behaviour First Change. I'm here with some of my colleagues who will introduce themselves in a second. But I wanted to start off by saying when Anna asked me to present this, I was a little terrified. I actually called my mum and I said, Mum, I'm a little terrified. I've been asked to present Behaviour First Change to behavioural scientists and people with PhDs. And if they ask me really academic questions, I don't have my amazing team of behavioural scientists here because it's 7 p.m. in Australia. So I might get a little stuck. For context, my background is commerce, taxation law, and startups. It's certainly not behavioural economics. And I said that to my mum and she said, yeah, it's a really good point. I wonder what they think they're going to learn from you, which was a really, really helpful thing for my mum to say to me. But what it did highlight was that we needed to really focus and reflect on what the value of our presentation is for you guys. And what it is the challenges and the lessons that we've learned through a lot of trial and error about applying behavioural sciences within organisational contexts where companies are really, really focused on the bottom line. But before we get into that, I wanted to introduce you to my amazing colleague, Monika Antoszewska.
Hi everyone, so my name is Monika and I'm a consultant here in Perth. I'm super lucky to work in the same team as Hannah and James. So a little bit about me is I come from a HR background, but I found that I've always been really fascinated with human behaviour. I think what I really resonate with is I have a really natural tendency to empathise with people and use that empathy to really try and understand what's driving their behaviour. I was really lucky to be a founding member of the Behaviour First team in Perth, and I've had so much fun innovating with the team to develop our Behaviour First methodology. I also was fortunate enough to be one of the first people to roll out our methodology at a client. So I'm really excited and looking forward to sharing with you today some of my experiences. And I'll throw back to James.
Thanks, Mon, and thanks everyone. We're really, really excited to talk to you tonight, or this afternoon, as it is for you. I'm particularly excited to be back at Warwick, or virtually back at Warwick. I didn't actually study there, but one of my ex-girlfriends did, and I spent a lot of time there and have many happy memories of your wonderful campus. And I hope that soon lockdown will end and you guys can get back there too. So I'm a director in Deloitte's human capital practice based here in Perth in Western Australia. And along with Hannah, I co-founded and now globally lead the Behaviour First capability within our human capital practice. My journey in behavioural science began as an undergrad at the London School of Economics, where, if I do say so myself, I was really sailing through first year economics. It looked a lot like A-level economics, to be honest. So you can imagine my surprise midway through the second term when my tutor took me on one side and said, by the way, you're going to sail through first year, but you're going to fail second and third year if you don't start focusing more on the equations and the graphs and really forget about thinking about what humans actually do. And for me, that sums up everything that's wrong with traditional economics. And it also explains why I dropped economics and studied philosophy instead. In the course of my philosophy studies, I did a module on scientific revolutions, where I encountered a paper by Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman, which really changed the way that I looked at economics and changed the way that I looked at the world. And I've been fascinated by behavioral science in all its forms ever since then. When I joined Deloitte a couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to quickly encounter a small group of people here in Perth who shared that passion. And that small group really created Behaviour First. Now, anyone who's founded anything loves to bang on about their foundation story. And Hannah and I are no exception to that. So I will try and rein this in. We thought we'd tell you just a little bit, an abridged version of how we got to where we are today. So that small group in Perth began with, well, humble beginnings, and we expanded over a few months to incorporate people from Australia and from the rest of Australia and from UK and Germany. And we were making, I think, pretty good progress at developing a behavioural science methodology to apply to organisations when something called COVID came along. And that put us into lockdown for about 3 months here in Perth, which posed some challenges. If you've ever tried to coordinate a global team from your front room with a 3-year-old running around, you'd know what I mean.
You'd also like to have naked cameras on my calls.
That's one of the reasons we're in the office tonight. Noah, if you're watching, hi. So the vast bulk of the approach that we developed and the toolkit that we deploy to clients and the marketing and the thought leadership that we've now produced really came from that 12-week period in lockdown. When we came out of lockdown, we had the elements of an approach, which over the next 6 months we rolled out globally. And we'll tell you a bit more about that approach in the rest of this presentation. But the one thing to highlight from the beginning is our mandate was very clear to create something that was practically applicable and commercially viable, but retained the academic rigor. And that's really at the heart of everything that we've done and everything that we're going to talk about tonight. So I think I did reasonably well at reining in the foundation story. That's less than 27 minutes, which is a record.
Before we go on though, we do want to know who we have watching us tonight and why they're here. So I think Mon is just going to quickly share a Menti survey. If you could grab your phones, you'll be able to use a QR code to jump onto that survey so we see who we're talking to.
Okay,
awesome. So that's the
started.
code. Oh yeah, Mon, you go ahead.
So if everyone could just head to menti.com and enter that code or use the QR code to log in. I'll just give everyone a moment and then we've just got a few questions for everyone. All right, I'll move to the first question. So where are you from? Poland, Czech. I know one word in Polish. Oh, amazing. It's really great to see people from so many different places. Italy, Finland, UK, Switzerland, India, Germany. Wow, this is amazing. Truly international presentation we have here. Oh, even Bangkok, amazing. Okay, thank you everyone for.
Sydney.
Woo-hoo.
Oh, I've got some from Sydney. Yes, definitely Hannah.
It wasn't.
All right, I'll just move on to the next question, even though I can see we still have some answers coming through, but it's clear to see that we have lots of people from all around the world with us, or at least come from all different places in the world. So what subject is your academic background? So as I mentioned, I come from a HR background, Hannah from tax, but we're really keen to, is it tax?
Commerce.
Commerce, same thing. So we're really keen to understand who else we have in the room.
Okay.
Mathematics, operational research, very interesting. Statistics are something that I could never achieve. French, I know no words in French, so I can't say hi to you. Oh, wait, is it bonjour? Crushed it. Advertising, interesting. Cognitive neuroscience. Wow, again, it's so amazing to see so many different backgrounds in our audience tonight. And I think the beauty about behavioural science is that you can really apply it to so many different areas. So I hope that you guys find the rest of this presentation really useful as well. All right, I'll just hop to the next slide, just looking at the time. So are you maybe perhaps studying undergrad, doing a postgrad degree? Are you working full-time in your field already, or something other that I haven't covered here?
Lots of postgrad, just what we feared.
Yeah, this is essentially the Hannah Terror Index.
Really triggered right now.
I really hope we have a C of PhD level behavioural scientists to really push us if we know what we're talking about. I'm really curious as to what this other is. I'm so sorry that I couldn't think of maybe working part-time. I'm unsure. So it looks like we have a real blend. So I hope that no matter whether you're still studying your undergrad or working full-time in the field, that you guys can all get something out of this. I'll just move on to the next question. So what do you think are the biggest challenges in applying behavioural science practically?
That's why we came to this presentation. You're supposed to tell us.
Lack of knowledge.
That does also make us quite valuable in the market though, which is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of these answers coming through I can really already resonate with that we're touching on today. Avoiding personal biases, yes, I'm not great at that. Ignoring underpinning theory, different cultures, different norms, definitely. Getting people to listen, isn't that just difficult in any job? The fear of carrying out experiments, absolutely. Balancing giving good results to clients and scientific integrity, absolutely. I think we'll be talking about that one a little bit later. Isn't always commercially viable. Again, that is definitely a concern. Thank you guys so much for some of this input. It's definitely, I think you guys are already showing like you will really resonate with some of the content that we're going to be talking about today. I'll just move on to our final question, which is, what are you most excited about learning in this conversation? And definitely not by reading the answers. We're going to make it up on the spot. No, I'm kidding.
Hopefully something.
Our experience of practical applications, we definitely have that in store for you. Job openings. I would just like to reiterate, we are not, this is not exactly a recruitment drive, but sure. The ways in which I can apply behavioural science in your career, absolutely. New areas where we can use behavioural science, definitely covering that. Case studies are in the picture, practical implications are going to be covered. How you apply it, real cases, awesome. Okay, it seems like what we've planned is on track with what you guys are keen to see, which I'm really, really excited about. Awesome. All right, well, just in the interest of time, I might swap back over to our presentation. But thank you guys all for contributing. Over to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Mon. So we did want to make this event as conversational and relaxed as possible, but we are consultants, so we couldn't avoid an agenda. We will start off with what Deloitte do. We aren't just an accounting firm. We do other things. That's why we're here. Then we'll talk about our offering Behaviour First and how we've applied it practically in industry. And then we'll talk about what's next for us and where the opportunities are actually in the market and where there's growing opportunity for us. So before we get started, we're going to play a video for you which introduces Behaviour First Change. Just to reiterate, we did do all of this in lockdown. We had aspirations post-COVID to have real cameramen and footage and cameos of ourselves, but COVID still exists. So please excuse all the stock footage that you're about to see.
On the 1st of January each year, millions of us decide to change our behaviour, to exercise more, eat healthier, or stop smoking. And every year, millions of us fail. The truth is, changing human behaviour is really difficult. For organisations wanting to transform, that's a problem. If we can't change our own behaviour, how can we expect to change anyone else's? Realising the benefits of any transformation, whether that's new systems, processes, or shifting workplace culture, ultimately depends on changing behaviour. Traditional change approaches lean heavily on communication and training. While those are necessary and important, on their own, they're often not enough to really change behaviour. Just think about your New Year's resolutions. Do you lack information about the benefits of exercise, healthy eating, or quitting smoking? Would more information really change those behaviours? Human behaviour is complicated. We don't always respond the way logic suggests we should. So how do we close the gap between intention and action? Little things can make a big impact, like subtle changes in our environment. They can nudge us in the right direction. But first, we need to understand what really drives behaviour. We need to start thinking about behaviour and talking about behaviour. We need to put behaviour first. Behaviour first change. Closing the gap between intention and action, one nudge at a time.
Thanks, Mon. So James, over to you to talk about what we do at Deloitte.
Thanks, Hannah. So I hope that most of you have heard of Deloitte. My suspicion is that many of you, if you have heard of Deloitte, think of us as an accounting firm. And while that's partially true, it is certainly not the whole truth. So we are the largest professional services firm in the world. We have more than 300,000 staff in most of the countries on Earth, and we are now in our 176th year of operation. We do a huge range of things, and I am still amazed every day by the breadth of the capability that we have. In addition to the traditional accounting that you're possibly familiar with, the assurance and advisory, we provide a huge range of services, including consulting. And that's where we sit. So Behaviour First sits within the human capital part of consulting. Now, I like to say human capital helps organizations with everything people related, but particularly the people aspects of organizational and workforce transformation.
Just a shout out to Monika, who actually told James to say that. Well done, Mon.
Where Behaviour First is, so as I said already, we have grown from humble beginnings in Perth to a truly global team, and we've now got about 150 people across 40 countries. We've got every continent covered except Antarctica. So that's a very quick overview of what Deloitte is and where Behaviour First fits. What we're going to talk about now is actually, what is it? So we start from the premise that all organizational change, all organizational transformation, whether it's new systems, new processes, changing culture, restructuring the organization itself, ultimately all transformation is about changing human behavior. Now, I don't need to tell everyone on this session that there has been an explosion in the last 10 or 15 years in behavioral insights. So there are more than 200 behavioral insights teams in government agencies around the world, and an array of teams in the private sector in industries ranging from the familiar big tech companies through banking and finance, even retail. Behavioral insights obviously is behavioral economics, but in our context, we take insights from psychology, sociology, anthropology, and neuroscience. We're not particularly picky. If we think it's got practical value, we use it. Unlike those behavioral insights teams in government and the private sector, most of which focus on changing consumer and citizen behavior, our innovation here is about taking behavioral insights and applying it inside organizations, focusing on employees, and specifically employees who are undergoing transformation projects. So that's what Behaviour First Change is. We will go into more detail about how we apply it in a moment, but you're maybe asking yourselves, why? Why do we need to do this within organizations? So as I've said, all transformation ultimately involves changing behavior. And the business benefits of big transformation programs depend to a huge degree on changing behavior. I don't need to tell anyone on this call that changing behavior is really hard. And there's a huge array of behavioral science literature that explains why that's the case. Traditional approaches to change management within organizations are heavily focused on training and communication. They are essentially about providing people with more information. If you communicate to them why we're changing something and what it is that we're changing, and then train them on how to adopt to the new reality, the assumption is their behavior will change. That's simply not true. While training and communication are necessary on their own, they're just not sufficient to change behavior. So we need to do something differently.
In terms of what we are doing differently, we designed a methodology that, as James mentioned, needed to be commercially viable and also academically rigorous. In order to do that, we needed to make it simple. So we split the methodology into 3 key phases. The first phase is the identify phase. In that phase, we're really getting down to what are the specific behaviours that will have the biggest impact in terms of realising benefits on the transformation programs that we work on, or mitigating risk. Once we identify what those behaviours are, we move into the phase 2, understand phase, where we use a framework, which I'll get into in a second, to identify the drivers of current behaviour and how they may act as barriers or enablers to changing behaviour. And then the third phase is taking all of those insights and using them to change the behaviour in the organisation. I referred quickly to the framework that we use to do that. It's called the FIRST framework. One of the biggest challenges we had when we were designing this is to take a vast array, as you know, of behavioural science across everything from anthropology to psychology, and making it effective, but also simple enough for our clients and our consultants to be able to take it, understand it, and use it to change behaviour. So we came up with the FIRST framework. It's split into two key categories. The first is fundamentals. So that's the psychological factors, the cognitive biases, those mental heuristics that are within everyone and that we know do drive behaviour. The other four pillars of the first framework are organisational levers. They're structured things within an organisation that are designed often to create certain behaviours. So they are incentives, relationships, stories, and tools. And we'll get into how we use that in a second. In a more detailed way, Mon, if we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. How we apply behaviour first. So within each of the three phases, we have 3 steps. I'm not going to take you through all 9 of these steps one by one conceptually because I don't think it will resonate with anyone. Instead, what we're going to do is talk about 3 case studies where we apply in a lot of detail the identify, understand, and change phase. So I'm going to switch over to Mon, who will talk about how she applied the identify phase on one of her clients.
Thanks, Hannah. So the first stage is our identify phase. So something to really consider about this is that although some of us on this call may really live and breathe thinking about behaviour, for a lot of our clients, this is just not the lens that they see the world through. So in a world where they're changing technologies, changing systems and processes, behaviour is just not really something that's front of mind for them. However, it has been proven that when we do bring this exciting conversation to the table, they do become really, really engaged. So while you'd assume perhaps that this process is quite simple, which it is, you would be surprised at how challenging this phase can be. So to give an example, while we were running a workshop for this particular client, we had a list of 24 behaviours that we were trying to identify, and we spent a 2-hour workshop debating over just 2 of these behaviours. So I think it can really show how engaged people can be, but also how contentious it can be. So because of this, it has been really quite challenging to lead clients to really identify what is the behaviours that we want to change and being able to define those behaviours. So I was really lucky enough to be one of the first people to roll out and test our methodology at one of our clients, which in this case was a major global oil and gas client. So to provide some context, they were going through a major digital transformation. So this involved the popping up of many individual projects that were really going to transform how they use their data, their systems, and with that, a lot of the changes with how they interact with that data and systems. So one particular high-profile project involved the implementation of a new tool that essentially would analyse data and provide insights, and that would then be used by leaders to help make forecasting decisions. So it was quite interesting to identify what new behaviours would need to come about in order to make the most of this tool. So what we needed to do was understand what behaviours were being done currently. That was the first step. So when we had a look at the current state process, we realised that the existing behaviour, or the behaviour that was already being performed, was that this data analysis was done by engineers. So as we were anticipating and looking to the future, a risk that we predicted was that even if this new tool came about, leaders wouldn't trust that data coming from the new tool because they were so used to trusting the credibility of these experienced engineers. So we predicted that a behaviour that may carry over even after the tool is implemented is that despite having that tool, leaders would still ask engineers to redo the analysis, check the data, give me a PowerPoint deck and present it before they make their decisions. So the next step is, well, if that's not how we want it done in the future, what do we want them to do? So as this tool was coming in, a new behaviour we anticipated that we would need to shape is that we wanted leaders to adopt the behaviour of actually going into the tool, viewing the dashboard themselves and making the decisions from that data then and there, as that's what is more efficient, the data quality was going to be higher. What we didn't want them to do was go into the dashboard or ask engineers to do it anyway, manually go on the tool, again, present a PowerPoint deck before making decisions. Because if they were still doing that behaviour that they were doing previously, why were they spending so much money on this tool? So like I mentioned, even just identifying that one behaviour and trying to define it at our client was really challenging. We spent hours trying to come up with a way of how you articulate that behaviour that's really easy to understand for everyone. But I think that's something that I really want to emphasize here, and I'm reiterating what James said before, but using this as an example, is that it's really important not to make assumptions. So just because there was going to be a new exciting tool, you've told leaders about it, you've trained them how to use the tool, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to adapt that behaviour, because there were all these other things influencing them of why they should stick to the status quo, like why they would rely on that original engineer's advice. So based on what we understand about behaviour, it was looking really likely that these leaders would have just done things the way that they used to. So that's why it's really important to really identify what behaviours need to change in order to ensure that new tool or system is actually going to get used in the way it's supposed to, because they're investing a lot of money in it. So hopefully that can give you a little bit of an overview of this identify phase. I'll now throw to James, who will take you through an example of how we applied the understand phase of our methodology at a client.
Thanks, Mon. So I believe that previously you had Rory Sutherland from Ogilvy speak at one of these events. And Rory has many very quotable lines, but one that I do like a lot, and it's very practically applicable, is about understanding the real why. And understanding the real why is very much at the heart of our understand phase. Essentially what we do in this phase is look to identify the barriers and enablers to the behavioural change that we're looking to produce. So the example I'll use is a not-for-profit that works primarily in Indigenous affairs here in Australia. And this client has grown very rapidly from about 10 people to over 100 in a year. And they are grappling with how to maintain their organizational culture and how to maintain consistency of performance from their employees. So we identified 6 key behaviors that were required to maintain that organizational culture and that level of performance that they wanted. And we ran workshops with a cross-section of their staff at all levels from various areas of the organization to understand what drives those behaviors and what might be those barriers or enablers to behavioral change. Now, what we found in this example was very consistent with what we've seen in clients across industries and across the world, which is when you first ask people to talk about what drives a particular behavior, they almost always say the same 2 things. They blame the boss and they blame the system. In our first framework, it always comes down to tools and relationships, and specifically relationships with your leaders. But we're here to try and understand that real why. And we ask really probing questions and we challenge. And almost every time we have this light bulb moment when you see people finally get it. Their boss isn't a complete idiot. There's a reason that their boss is telling them to do something or role modeling a certain behavior. It's always deeper. It's about incentives. It's about relationships with other parts of the organization, etc. The other key lesson that I'd call out from this client, and this was highlighted in one of the answers to the Menti, is around the challenges with translating behavioral science across different cultures. And I'm sure everyone on the call is familiar with the work around WEIRD, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic is the acronym. And so much of the behavioral science literature, so many behavioral science experiments have essentially been run on very similar populations, usually students at American universities. and there is a lot of debate about how well the findings replicate across cultures. One of the things that we saw on this client was a real challenge around particular nuances of Indigenous culture, and particularly around shame. And where normally we might propose to use social norms as a mechanism to drive behavioral change, or use role modeling, for example, there was a real aversion to that in a culture where people do not like to be called out as individuals, which I think is the tip of the iceberg of the challenges of replicating behavioral science across cultures. But it was a really interesting example. Okay, that's the case study for the understand phase. I'll throw to Han now to talk about an example of where we used the first framework to actually change behavior.
So my client was a domestic retail bank. For context, in 2019, Australia undertook a parliamentary investigation into the misconduct of banks. And off the back of that investigation, this particular client undertook a culture review. And one of the things that they identified was that for them to really shift their culture to their desired culture, they needed to recognise people for their performance. We were brought in to help them achieve that. And in the identify phase, the prioritised behaviour that they identified was that leaders needed to consistently apply that end-to-end performance and recognition framework so that they were having meaningful conversations on an ongoing basis. In the understand phase, we undertook the workshops, and the two pillars that were most significantly driving the behaviour of inconsistent performance and recognition was incentive and stories. In particular, the KPIs of the leaders who were meant to carry out this process were very focused on financials and didn't reward their leaders for investing in their people. And from a stories perspective, everything from the bank's mission statement to their messaging from the CEO created a very egalitarian-like culture where it was almost frowned upon to call out standout performers within the team. So we did all of this analysis and we presented it as part of our change phase to the executive, and there wasn't a lot of interest for them to change the KPIs or to change the mission statement of the bank. It would have been a very big undertaking and they didn't have the finances to do that. So what they did ask us to do was look at our fundamental framework. What are those psychological factors, those cognitive biases that we can play on to shift behaviour? We ended up rolling out about 15 nudges throughout the project. Some of them I'll just mention. So we had commitment devices. We got our leaders to stand up in front of their teams and commit at the start of the performance and remuneration cycle that they were going to actively roll out that process end to end and invest in their people. We also had screensavers where we had nudges coming up at every stage within the process, and towards the end we had phrases like 90% of your leaders have achieved the finalised end-to-end process of performance. Have you done it? So we really got that social norms at play to get the last people to get a wriggle on. Unfortunately, COVID hit and we didn't get an opportunity to measure the success of that project, but what we did do is have feedback from the client. And one of the key takeaways on that was that they really loved nudges. For them, being very commercially focused, having something that is cheap to implement, quick to implement, and didn't require a lot of resources to implement, that would even incrementally change the behaviour across thousands of people, had a huge impact on their bottom line. So for us, it was really important learning that even though we can't change those kind of big structural things that we would have loved to have changed and were frustrated that we couldn't, the nudging was a really, really important thing that even in the banking world, they were really interested in applying. So that is 3 practical examples of where we've applied those 3 phases of our approach. We have now rolled this out globally and we've had a lot of various projects. So we tried to consolidate and identify the kind of big lessons learned across the 3 phases. So I'm just going to quickly talk you through them. We've touched on these with our clients. That's why we chose those particular case studies, but I want to reiterate them. In the identify phase, we live and breathe behaviour. all of the students that we're talking to at the moment are interested in behaviour. They talk about behaviour. We talk about behaviour. Our clients don't. So just to get them to start thinking behaviourally and talking about behaviour is a huge value add for them. One of the challenges that we have, though, is defining behaviour is really hard. We have come up with a 5 Ws framework to be able to define behaviour, because what we consistently got was we want people to be innovative, or we want people to collaborate. And those kind of value statements are not enough. They're not practical enough for people to be able to understand what they're meant to do in those situations. So the 5W framework helped us to refine those behaviours. We have to identify the who, the what, the why, the when, and the where for us to be able to practically change those behaviours. In the understand phase, as James mentioned, everyone points to their leaders and their systems as the reason that they don't behave in the way that their organisations would like them to. We've spent a lot of time and a lot of training working out how we can dig deeper and probe people to think behaviourally and really understand what is driving their behaviour. And in those conversations, we try and pick up on little cues around social norms at play or authority bias at play, just to ensure that we've captured everything. And then in the final phase, the change phase, our biggest lesson was that some of these really structural organisational levers are really important in driving behaviour, but they're often really hard to change. That was really disappointing for us until we realised that actually there's still a huge amount of value in raising them with the leaders. We educated our leaders in our client sites as to what the things that they set up within their organisation drove from a behavioural standpoint. And in the future, they've considered that when they've been defining KPIs and defining their mission statements going forward. So it's been a huge part of our value. Now, before we finish up and go to Q&A, we wanted to talk about what's next for Behaviour First Change and where we're targeting across industries and where we see the opportunity in the market.
Thanks, Han. So, as I said at the beginning, Behaviour First is all about using behavioural science within organisations to help organisations change the behaviour of their own people. And so many of the most important challenges and the most important opportunities facing organisations hinge on changing staff behaviour. So we've called out 6 examples here, which we'll talk to in a little more detail. Han, technology implementation.
Yeah, so tech implementation is one of my babies. I focus a lot on in the behavioural. Essentially, clients, they're really focused on these amazing opportunities that what we have the conversation with them about. Because there's a great system that has great functionality, doesn't mean you're going to realise the benefits of those systems unless your people do what you need them to do when they're interacting with those systems. So our focus in the tech implementation space is around realising the benefits of behaviour and mitigating the risks that behaviour will bring if it's not done the right way. From a ways of working perspective, this kind of came off the back of COVID. A lot of our clients really saw an increase actually in productivity off the back of COVID with everyone working from home. And the question has been, how do we sustain that increase in productivity? So it's a real early days for us. And we're starting to have conversations with our clients around what those behaviours were and how we can sustain and continue them going forward.
So it might surprise some people on the call to learn this, but despite being a middle-aged white male, I am in fact passionate about diversity and inclusion. Now, diversity and inclusion has been a hot topic in organisations for a number of years. It's never, however, been more topical than it is now with Black Lives Matter, etc. The challenge that we see is that the default response of large organizations to this issue is unconscious bias training. Now, in the US alone, that is an $8 billion a year industry. $8 billion. I probably don't need to tell the behavioral scientists on the call that the same literature which explains why or identifies the existence of unconscious bias also makes fairly clear that just making people aware that they might have unconscious bias is not a very effective way of dealing with the problem. Organizations need to find more practical solutions. They need to find ways of changing behavior within the organization that will lead to better diversity and inclusion outcomes. Just making people aware is not the solution. Risk and compliance. So this is not something that people often immediately associate with behavioral science, but risk and compliance functions in large organizations across industries are grappling with an array of challenges that ultimately boil down to the risk of people doing the wrong thing. Now, that can take many forms depending on the industry, but fundamentally, it's about behavior. How can we help our clients influence their people to do the right thing and not do the wrong thing? Again, traditional approaches here are e-learning and posters on walls. Making people aware is not the answer, as everyone on this call knows. Safety. So particularly close to our hearts here in Perth, which, in case you're not aware, is a mining and oil and gas town. And companies in those industries and in many others have a huge focus on the safety of their people. Again, so much of the risk around safety is behavioral. It's about people doing the wrong thing, taking shortcuts, taking risks, and putting themselves and their colleagues at risk of harm. There's a huge amount of opportunity in this space.
The final one that we identified is cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is the word of the day in a lot of our clients at the moment, and for good reason. But the focus has really been on the technology, the coding. How can we make sure our systems are more secure? But what we know is that more than half of cybersecurity breaches are a result of human error. So our focus is how do we minimize human error? How do we identify what behaviors we need from our people in order to reduce the risk of cyber breaches? One of the really cool techniques that I've seen is at an organisation here in Perth where they do basically a cry wolf of phishing emails, and when you get sent a phishing email, if you report it, you get a coffee voucher. So everyone gets around it and everyone's really excited for their phishing emails because they get a coffee voucher when they get it right. But what it does mean is that when there are real phishing emails that come through, everybody reports it and they minimize their risk of cybersecurity significantly. So things like that are really innovative, they're creative, they're fun to come up with, but they actually work. I think that wraps up our presentation. We have 12 minutes left, so we just wanted to open it up for Q&A. I think before we do, or as you start typing in your questions, one of the things that I think is really exciting for us and hopefully for you is that behavioural economics, particularly due to COVID, has become something that clients are really excited about and really open to talking about, where before they really weren't. Even clients like mining, which typically are not as interested in those kind of conversations, are opening their doors to us. And I think the industry is going to grow significantly. So it's a really good industry to be in. It's a really good topic to be studying. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there for you.
So let the questions begin. No, I think the one thing I'll say around that is, and I know this is probably a little bit hard to take for those in the UK, which is in the midst of lockdown 3, but COVID has been hugely beneficial for applied behavioural science. And I've heard it described as the largest behavioural change experiment in human history. And I think it's certainly that. I have never seen so much mainstream interest and so many mainstream publications, mainstream articles about behavioural science. And I think it's really brought behavioural science and its potential applications to the forefront of a lot of people's minds. So COVID, the gift that keeps on giving.
So we do have a few questions coming through now. The first is, how do you measure the success of implemented behavioural interventions? So this, I think we can publish that. Just working through the tech, hold on. Okay, cool. So that is a very, very good question and something we've been grappling with for a long time, and it's not something we've gotten right, or at least perfect. Our clients, as it was raised in the mentee survey, aren't keen on doing experiments on their people, and understandably, they come in to dramatically transform their organisations, not part of their organisations, while we leave a control group acting in the way that they were before. So it's really, really hard for us to measure the success of our behavioural interventions, particularly where we're also doing communications and training, and there's changes in mission statements and a bunch of other factors that will cause change of behaviour. What we do is we have various systems within Deloitte that capture changes in behaviour through change impact assessments and those kinds of things. So we're working through that at the moment. It's something we're very, very new. Our business and behaviour first change. It's something that we're probably grappling with in the next few years, and we have a few data scientists and a team in New York who are really focused on working out the value of our behavioural interventions and also the return on investment, which will help us go to market.
I think, yeah, I agree with all of that. I think just to add, it's that point about it's very difficult to isolate the variables. When there's so much changing at the same time, it's very difficult to pinpoint the effectiveness of a particular intervention. That said, given that so much transformation work involves the implementation of new technology, you have access to a lot of data. It's very easy in most cases to come up with a data proxy for whatever the behavioral change is. So you can generally measure fairly easily if the behavior has changed in the way that you want it to. What is harder is isolating what caused that change. So from a client perspective, look, if they wanted the behavior to change and you demonstrate that it's changed, they're pretty happy. It won't meet academic standards for publication because you can't isolate the variable, but the result from a client perspective is still positive.
And on that point, one of the things that we focused on in the measure phase is focusing on the change of behaviour rather than the effectiveness of the interventions themselves. So we do measure the change in behaviour, but it's, again, hard to isolate what is our interventions and what is the rest of the organisation. So the next one was, at Deloitte, how do you cross collaborate, work with other functions? Publish that one. So I will start, and then we've been doing different kind of cross collaboration. In the risk advisory space, we do a lot of work with them, and we've been working with them for 6 months now. Risk advisory is a big one for us. As James mentioned, safety and health is a real market in WA, particularly the mining industry. So we've been working a lot to go to market with them.
So I'd say we work very well cross collaboratively. Deloitte is client driven, and essentially we have so much capability here. We have such a broad variety of offerings and skill sets. It all comes together around clients. So it's essentially, who are the right people, what are the right capabilities to bring to bear on this specific client problem.
One of the questions I really like, and I think James, you're best placed to answer this with your work in the Indigenous Affairs Department, but how do you go about understanding behaviours when you're dealing with extremely sensitive topics and with vulnerable groups?
Sensitively is the short answer. Look, to apply some behavioural science to ourselves, we try and run a variety of workshops and one-to-one interviews in our understand phase. The advantage of workshops is you get multiple people and you get multiple perspectives, and the conversation naturally flows and people build on what each other say. And the downside of that, obviously, is people may not be completely candid. People may be influenced by what others have said, particularly people more senior than them. So we try and take that balanced approach. In an ideal world, we do an array of workshops supplemented by one-on-one interviews.
And if I could just add to that as well. So from my client experience, I did have that happen. So, you know, we were asking team members to basically, they felt very almost that they didn't want to share information because they were scared about talking about their leaders behind their backs, even if that was actually what was influencing their behaviour. So that sort of resistance is something that, you know, we face practically and really prevented us from doing that understand phase at a client. So I think, James, you're 100% spot on. It's about being sensitive, ensuring confidentiality, and probably something that isn't in the literature is don't underestimate the power of relationship building. So sometimes for those workshops or interviews to be effective, you can't just go in blind, but actually build that trust with your client first.
100% agree with you, Mum. Moving on to a question about us, because we like to talk about us. How did Behaviour first come about at Deloitte? Did Deloitte approach you, or did we approach Deloitte? So we were working at Deloitte when the need arose and became, behavioural consulting became a global priority for Deloitte. We had already started almost a book club on behavioural economics, so we were pretty well placed to have our team of behavioural science enthusiasts to jump on board. But where the real drive came in was around that tech implementation side. So there was a big drive around the implementation of a particular technology globally. And one of the key, I guess, value adds that Deloitte saw when we went to market was that we wouldn't just implement the technology, but we would help organizations frame and change behavior within their organizations to realize the benefit of that technology. So globally, we were funded within Deloitte to come up with a methodology and deliver it to market.
Pretty good summary.
Thank you. Technology helping in determining solutions and implementations. This is something James has been working on, so I'm going to throw to you.
So the holy grail here is essentially digital nudging. So bringing together behavioral science and data science. At the moment, we're not there, but it's something that we are working on this year, and we've actually just set up a global working group to look at that. There's, again, market-driven, a huge upsurge of interest in this space. Aside from the big tech companies, which we're all familiar with, there's been a lot of work done in the health sector, and COVID has really catalyzed this. So things like contact tracing and vaccine uptake, there's a huge appetite from clients to be able to influence those behaviors and to do so digitally. So that's something that we're looking to build
on. We've got a question around how we recruit and find clients. Do new clients tend to come to you deliberately looking for behavioural science advice, or is it more... I don't know where that went.
Thank God, public.
Oh, so I will answer that. It's a mix. One of the key, basically we had to come up with a marketing strategy once we built the methodology, and there was a two-pronged approach. One was to educate everyone within Deloitte around the value of behavioural science, so that when they were working with their clients, they could see where there were behavioural gaps and they would bring us in to support that. As we rolled it out through that kind of immersion, clients started to understand our value, and then they came to us specifically around other problems that they had within their organisations. Other than that, we do blog posts, we educate our partners so that when they do conversations like this, where clients are watching, they can reflect on that and come to us with any opportunities that they have for us as well. That was a good one. Have you ever applied your framework within your own organisation? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, we have. We have 2 projects.
There's quite a few globally. There's an internal diversity and inclusion project in the UK that I'm aware of. I know there's an internal culture project in Germany. We've been asked to do something here in Australia around our eminence. There's quite a few.
We also, one of our offices is moving to a different office, so we're helping to support the kind of culture that they want and the behaviours that they want in that new office, like collaboration and hot desking and those kinds of things. So yes, dangerous game when you are rolling it out on the people who pay your bills, but it's worked so far, so we're okay. How are you finding Deloitte? I'll be joining you as consulting intern in London in September. Well, welcome, Anonymous. I'm not sure who you are, but you will love it. We love it. We have an amazing team here, actually. We'll probably go for drinks after this because it is 8 p.m. our time, not midday. But yeah, it's a great learning opportunity, great opportunity for you to get kind of cross-industry, cross-functional experience, and it's also just a really dynamic, fun place to work.
I would echo all of that. I would also say the thing that blows me away every day is the breadth of capability that we have. I haven't mentioned it yet, but the accounting firm that we work for has a neuroscience institute. So the Deloitte Neuroscience Institute is in Hamburg, and they are a bunch of neuroscientists who have all of the funky kit, to track eye movement, measure electrical impulses in the brain, etc. That's the kind of thing that you find lying around Deloitte.
We should shout out to them, actually. They were a huge help for us when we designed the Behaviour approach, and they're an amazing team. What has been your biggest success and biggest blunder? Oh, God.
Don't answer that.
I've got one. James, you want to share?
So yes, I know exactly what Mon's driving at. So the oil and gas client that Monika mentioned, so I wasn't working on that client, but this is a blunder. So don't worry, I'm not talking about successes. So I was brought in and badged as an expert, and James leads this globally, and blah blah blah. So James is going to come run this workshop. You may have noticed in our approach that in the identify phase, we call out new behaviours and underperformed behaviours. Now, we should have said when we went through that there's actually a competition running for anyone out there who can come up with a better name than underperformed behaviours. Because what we learned at that client was that when you stand in front of a room full of engineers and start to talk to them about underperforming behaviours, they get really pissed off. Who is this idiot from Deloitte coming in and telling us that we underperform behaviours?
And James was never invited back.
True story.
I like there was one around how we test, I'm just trying to find it, our own bias. Oh yeah, bit of metadata question. How do you check your own biases in your work? It was something that when we were going through the process of designing the methodology we were stuck on, what we came up with is that we don't do any workshops or interviews alone. So there's always at least 2 of us in the room, and one of them is usually more removed than the other. So someone who's on the project, but not necessarily in the behavioural science team. And the reason that we do that is we educate them on kind of what those biases are, but we ask each other to challenge each other and make sure that we aren't going into that with suggestions or an already understanding of what we think. We want to hear what we think is going on. And so that we have a post-workshop challenge session basically where we play back what we thought and we bounce off each other. Did that really happen, or was that something we kind of consumed ourselves? We also have a third person who writes verbatim what's going on in those workshops for the most part, so that we can check ourselves against that as well.
I'm really interested to answer the question, has it been difficult to generate buy-in or sell BI to client leadership? Because I think I've got a really good experience with this. So something that we found is that leaders love the idea of changing behaviour. The fact that if they can change the behaviour of people in their organisations, they look like a winner. They look like they're doing the best job. What I found is that when you take that and you speak to people on the ground, so this was my job, so I was going to more lower level team members and I said, great, we're going to change behaviour. They just turned around and looked at me and they said, why is this my problem? So to try and enlist their help in, conducting these interviews or providing, doing these focus groups, I got a lot of challenge and resistance that they said, no, I don't want to get involved. There was basically no incentive for them to change that behaviour. Like, why would they care about it? So I think that's a really, really good point in terms of thinking about, you need to position, leaders are going to love it, but when you go that next level down, you really need to position it, what's in it for them to change that behaviour. The same rationale isn't going to work. So if any of you are rolling this out in an organisation, I definitely would take that advice.
Such a good call out, and something we need to always challenge ourselves on, because I think we all live in this like behaviour's amazing world, and sometimes we have to kind of rein that in.
I'll take the easy questions. Is Behaviour First also working in India? Yes. So we've got a presence in Delhi and Mumbai, and 39 other countries as well. Is there a shortcut to transform your own behaviour? So I will answer this slightly tangentially. There is a great podcast where Sam Harris interviews Daniel Kahneman and basically asks, the father of behavioral economics with his Nobel Prize, if his lifetime's work understanding this topic makes him any better at changing his own behaviour. And his answer is, of course not. So no, I don't have the silver bullet, I'm afraid.
Well, one thing that we do have is each other, and I feel like both of us do these ninja mind tricks on each other half the time when we're not getting stuff done. So not necessarily alone, I don't think we change behaviour. I think together we change each other's a little bit. What is the biggest challenge for your team when it comes to applying behavioural economics? It's a good question, and I think it probably depends on the client. If the client is someone who is really interested in behavioural sciences, things become a little easier. But I think the biggest challenge for us is really getting them to think and talk about behaviour in a way that's tangible and meaningful for people, rather than at this kind of really high level that doesn't actually translate to any behaviour itself. What would you say your biggest challenge is?
Well, I'd actually say that the biggest challenge, this links back and answers the other question as well about checking your own biases. I have a bias towards behaviour, so I see behaviour and behavioural solutions everywhere. So my biggest challenge is reminding myself that there may be other solutions. Not everything is a behavioural problem.
Got two more questions. Do you want to pick one?
My old person eyes. How do you ensure your nudges are born from an ethical framework? That is a great question. So Deloitte as a whole has a very strong ethical focus, and the kinds of clients that we deal with, or should we say that there is a level of client selection, and we won't deal with certain clients, and where there are perceived major ethical challenges, we will say no to work. The kinds of work that we are doing within Behaviour First is very much focused on, as we've talked about, influencing employees within organisations. I can say fairly confidently that we haven't yet encountered a situation where behaviour that we're trying to influence is ethically challenged.
No, I think it's a good call out actually, and something that we probably should look at again. But I think at the moment the good thing is that we still have kind of some key people in each country who QA all of the work that's been done. So there is a kind of a roll up into people who are basically aware of the ethical boundaries of Deloitte and make sure that that's applied. As we roll it out globally and it keeps expanding, that is going to be challenged to have one or two people across all of it. So it's something that we will need to set up, and it's a structure that we need. Can you tell us more about the types of tools you use? Being a market researcher, I'm interested in the place of traditional tools like questionnaires or focus groups in behavioural science. Talk about the change scout.
So yeah, we've got various tools. One thing Deloitte does not have a shortage of is tools. And we are working with various of our internal platform providers to build Behaviour First into those tools from a change management perspective. I think surveys have their place, I think people in HR and human capital do have a bias towards using surveys, and I am always slightly dubious about surveys, particularly within organizations. I've seen so many slides with incredible statistics about positive responses to surveys. And then when you look at the response rate, yes, the 27% of people who responded said very positive things, but the 73% who didn't respond may not have been so positive. So I think things like surveys have their own challenges. As I've already talked about, we try and use a variety of workshops, interviews, etc. We really try and vary our approaches so that we cut through bias as much as possible, so that we get a variety of perspectives in a variety of different contexts.
I think one of the tools that I get excited by is one that was not developed by us, but the Deloitte Neuroscience Institute, called AONA. And basically what it does is it it ignores the organizational structure that is sitting within a company. And what it tries to do is create a structure within the organization that identifies the influences within each of the teams. So what it does is it strips, well, it's everything from surveys to stripping data within the organizations to understand who those people are that are looked to as influencers within teams. And what that does for us is it identifies the people who, if we can kind of shift their behaviour, social norms tells us that the behaviour of others will shift, and it makes our lives a little easier. So Iona is a really innovative tool, something that's been really cool to see roll out globally. It's something that we're using.
Organizational network analysis is the technique.
I did not think of it.
And it essentially tells you what the real network is. So in its purest form, if you can get client permission, it scrapes data from the Microsoft Exchange server and looks at who emails who chats who has meetings with who, and builds that picture of what is the real network, what is the real org structure. It's amazing.
That is for questions, which is good because we are over time, but we just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for joining. There were some really good questions, some food for thought. Oh, we have one more. Should we take it? This is the last one though, guys.
No, we haven't.
No one can see that.
Sorry, yes.
So a lot of companies, oh, it's gone now.
A lot of companies trying to apply behavioral economics start to build behavioral labs and implement specific roles. No, we haven't done that yet. I think it's something that is going to grow, right? I think more and more organizations in different industries are starting to recognize the importance of this. And you talked about the industries, we've talked about the different areas of those companies. It's really growing. Those units are going to proliferate. But no, we haven't yet built one.
I think that's it from us. A big shout out to Anna and Electra who organised today. They reached out to us all the way in Perth down under. So we really appreciate you guys for finding us and setting this up. It's been a lot of fun. The questions and the engagement has been amazing. There's a lot of food for thought for us. And as we roll this out globally, there's a lot of chance for us to develop and grow. So as we're really happy for you to reach out to us if you have other questions or suggestions. We would love your input.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, guys. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you from me as well.
See you guys later.
Thank you very much.